No one in that gym knew they were breathing the same air as an undefeated warrior until the day the champion decided to humiliate the wrong man. The Apex Fight Academy smelled like sweat, rubber mats, and ambition. Located just outside the Las Vegas Strip, it was where UFC champions trained, where reporters camped outside for quotes, and where every hopeful fighter in the country dreamed of earning a spot on the Wall of Fame. At 5 in the morning, before any of that ambition walked through the doors, Julian Shaw was already there. He moved through the gym in silence, a mop in one hand and a bucket in the other, wiping down the mats where blood and sweat had dried overnight. He was somewhere in his late 30s, built like a man who had once trained hard but had let his broad frame soften just enough to disappear into the background. His gray janitor's uniform hung loose on his shoulders. His eyes, calm and distant, rarely met anyone else's. To the fighters who trained there, he was furniture, a name they never bothered to learn. Some called him Old Man. Others didn't call him anything at all. Julian preferred it that way. He arrived before sunrise and left after the last fighter had showered and gone home. He spoke only when spoken to, and even then his answers were short. A nod, a yes, sir, a quiet, I'll take care of it. He fixed broken locker hinges, restocked towels, swept up water bottles left behind by men chasing glory. He never watched the sparring sessions too closely. He never let his eyes linger on a takedown or a combination a second longer than necessary. But sometimes, when nobody was looking, his hands would twitch, muscle memory reacting to a technique thrown wrong, a mistake only a trainer could catch. And then he would look away, grip the mop tighter, and keep moving. That morning, the gym had a different energy. Cameras were being set up near the main cage, lighting rigs, a production crew adjusting microphones. The reason became clear when the front door swung open and Cole Braddock walked in like he owned the sunlight itself. Braddock was a reigning UFC middleweight champion, 26 years old, undefeated in his last 11 fights, and impossible to ignore. He had the kind of face that belonged on billboards, the kind of trash talk that trended for days, and an ego large enough to fill the entire building. His management had arranged a day-in-the-life video for his sponsors, showing fans what it looked like behind the curtain of a champion's daily grind. He strutted through the gym, flashing a grin at the camera, showing off his championship belt slung over one shoulder. Fighters stopped their training to greet him. Staff members waved. Braddock soaked in every second of it. Then he saw Julian. The janitor was on one knee near the cage, wiping a smear off the canvas edge, his back to the cameras. Braddock smirked. An idea sparked behind his eyes, the kind of idea that came from a man who had never once considered consequences. "Yo, hold up," Braddock said, waving toward the camera crew. Get this on camera." He walked over and stood above Julian, arms crossed, chin tilted with theatrical confidence. "This," Braddock announced to the camera, gesturing down at Julian like he was presenting an exhibit, "is what happens when you don't have what it takes. You end up mopping floors while champions like me make history." A few fighters nearby chuckled awkwardly. Others looked away, unsure whether to laugh or feel embarrassed for the older man kneeling on the mat. Julian didn't respond. He kept wiping the canvas, his jaw tightening just slightly, the only visible sign that the words had landed at all. "Hey," Braddock said, nudging Julian's shoulder with his foot. Not hard, just enough to make a point. "I'm talking to you, old man. What, you deaf? Or just too slow to keep up?" Laughter rippled through the gym. Someone raised a phone to record. Julian rose slowly, mop in hand, his expression unreadable. "I have work to do," he said quietly, and turned to walk away. That should have been the end of it. But Braddock, fueled by the attention of the cameras and the crowd forming around him, wasn't finished. Nah, wait," he called out, stepping in front of Julian, blocking his path. "You know what? I got an idea. Since you're always around here watching us train, pretending like you know something," he spread his arms wide, playing to the crowd, "why don't you step in a cage with me? Just for fun. Let's see what a mop and bucket champion's got." The gym went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet before something memorable happens. Julian's eyes finally lifted and met Braddock's for a brief moment. So brief that only a few people even noticed. Something shifted behind them. Not fear, not embarrassment. Something older. something that had been buried for a very long time. "I don't think that a good idea," Julian said evenly. Braddock grinned wider, sensing weakness where there was none. "Scared?" he taunted, playing directly to the lens now aimed at his face. "Come on, champ. 1 round. I'll even go easy on you, old man, like you might not survive a real one." The crowd laughed again. Someone shouted, "Do it, Cole." Phones rose higher. Julian looked down at the mop in his hands, then at the cage behind Braddock. The cage he hadn't stepped inside in almost a decade. His grip tightened around the wooden handle until his knuckles turned pale. Somewhere behind his calm exterior, a memory stirred. A memory of blood on canvas, of a promise made beside a hospital bed, of a name he had buried the same day he buried his brother. He set the mop against the wall. "Fine," Julian said quietly. 1 round. The gym erupted in stunned murmurs. Braddock's grin faltered for just a fraction of a second, surprised the old man had actually agreed, before he masked it with a laugh and clapped his hands together. "Let's go, then. Someone get this man some gloves." Nobody in that gym had any idea what they had just set in motion. Nobody knew that the quiet janitor mopping their floors every morning had once been called something else entirely. A name whispered with respect in rooms most of them would never enter. They were about to find out. "Get this man some gloves," Braddock had said with a laugh. Not knowing those hands had ended fights before most of these fighters had learned to throw a punch. Word spread through the gym faster than anyone could stop it. Within minutes, fighters abandoned their own training sessions to gather around the main cage. Coaches stepped out of their offices. The production crew, sensing a viral moment forming in front of their cameras, repositioned every angle they had. Julian stood near the cage entrance, a pair of borrowed gloves in his hands, staring at them like they belonged to someone else's life. A young fighter named Marcus, one of the few people in the gym who occasionally exchanged small talk with Julian, jogged up beside him. "Hey, man, you don't have to do this," Marcus said quietly, glancing nervously toward Braddock, who was already stretching theatrically for the cameras. "He's not going to hold back. Not with everyone watching." "I know," Julian said. "Then why?" "Because staying quiet is a cost too," Julian said, cutting him off gently. He looked at Marcus with something like understanding, maybe even gratitude for the concern. Sometimes silence just means you're waiting for the right moment. Marcus didn't understand what that meant. Not yet. Inside the cage, Braddock paced with the confidence of a man who had never once doubted his own greatness. He turned to the camera crew and flashed his championship smile. "This is going to be great content," he said with a wink. "Real Rocky story, except I'm not letting the underdog win." The gym doors opened again, and more people filed in. Fighters from other classes, front desk staff, even a few members of the public who had been training in the adjacent cardio room. Word of a champion versus a janitor spread through group chats and social media before the fight had even started. What began as a joke for a sponsor video was quickly becoming something the entire gym wanted to witness. Julian climbed into the cage. The moment his feet touched the canvas, something in his posture changed. It was subtle, a straightening of the spine, a settling of the shoulders, a quiet stillness that hadn't been there moments before. Marcus, watching from ringside, tilted his head slightly, sensing the shift but unable to name it. Braddock noticed too, though he mistook it for nerves. "Relax, old man," he said, bouncing on his toes. "I promise I'll be gentle. Wouldn't want to break a hip." Laughter rippled through the crowd again. Julian said nothing. He simply rolled his neck once, exhaled slowly through his nose, and settled into a stance. It was that stance that made Marcus's stomach drop. It wasn't clumsy. It wasn't the stance of a man who had never fought before. Marcus had trained under enough coaches to recognize a fighting foundation when he saw one. The balanced weight distribution, the slightly bladed hips, the loose, ready hands. It was textbook, almost military in its precision. But before Marcus could say anything, the referee, one of the gym's senior coaches, pulled in reluctantly to officiate the impromptu match. Called for the round to begin. Braddock exploded forward immediately, throwing a looping right hand to end things quickly and give the cameras their highlight reel finish. Julian wasn't there when it landed. He had simply stepped half an inch to the side, letting the punch sail past his ear, Close enough that the crowd gasped at how near it seemed, yet far enough that it never had a chance of connecting. Braddock stumbled slightly from the missed momentum, catching himself before he could look foolish. "Lucky," Braddock muttered, resetting. He threw again, a combination this time, jab, cross, hook, an exact copy of the sequence that had ended his last 3 fights early. Julian slipped the jab, rolled under the cross, and simply stepped back out of range of the hook, his hands never leaving their defensive position, his feet never crossing, his balance never wavering. The crowd, which had gathered expecting a quick and humiliating finish for comedic content, went eerily silent. Phones remained raised, but the laughter had stopped. Braddock's jaw tightened. He was a champion. Nobody moved like that against him. Not sparring partners, not rank contenders, nobody. He pressed forward again, more aggressive now, trying to close distance and force a clinch where his superior strength could take over. Julian pivoted at the last second, redirecting Braddock's momentum with a light touch on the shoulder that sent the champion stumbling past him. It wasn't a strike. It wasn't even forceful. It was precise, economical, almost gentle, and somehow more humiliating than any punch could have been. The crowd began to murmur, confusion and disbelief spreading through their ranks. Someone in the back whispered, "Is he playing with him?" Braddock spun around, chest heaving, frustration flashing across his face for the first time. "Stand still," he snapped. "I am standing," Julian said calmly. "You're just not hitting where I am." A few nervous laughs broke out among the crowd, quickly silenced by the tension thick enough to feel. Braddock's pride, wounded now in front of his own cameras, in front of his own gym, in front of fans who idolized him, would not allow him to slow down. He surged forward one more time, abandoning technique entirely in favor of raw aggression, throwing a wild combination meant to overwhelm through sheer volume. And that was when Julian, for the first time, moved forward instead of back. It happened too fast for most of the crowd to process clearly. A slip punch, a controlled clinch, a subtle redirection of weight. And suddenly Braddock, the undefeated middleweight champion of the world, was on the canvas, staring up at the gym lights, completely unsure of how he had gotten there. Gasps erupted around the cage. Someone dropped their phone. The camera crew scrambled to make sure they had captured the angle. Julian stepped back immediately, giving Braddock room to rise, offering no follow-up strikes, no taunts, no celebration. He simply stood there, breathing evenly, waiting. Braddock pushed himself up slowly, humiliation burning hotter across his face than any punch could have caused. He stared at Julian, really looked at him for the first time, and something in the janitor's calm, unshaken eyes made a cold realization creep through him. This wasn't luck. This wasn't beginner's confidence. This man had done this before, many times, against people far more dangerous than a UFC champion having a bad afternoon. Who are you?" Braddock asked, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier arrogance. Julian lowered his hand slightly, and for the briefest moment, the mask of the quiet janitor slipped, revealing something underneath that the gym had never seen before, a flicker of old pain, old pride, and a past that refused to stay buried any longer. "Someone you shouldn't have challenged," Julian said quietly. And then, for the first time in years, he allowed himself to remember exactly who he used to be. Before he was a janitor, the world knew him by a different name, one that made hardened soldiers go quiet when they said it: the Phantom. 10 years earlier, Julian Shaw was not mopping floors. He was standing in the center of a military training facility, drilling elite combat instructors on techniques that most fighters would never be allowed to learn outside classified programs. He had joined the Army at 19, driven by a need for discipline that his chaotic childhood had never given him. What started as basic training quickly revealed a natural gift, reflexes sharper than his instructors, a mind that absorbed technique like water into dry earth, and a level of composure under pressure that made veteran soldiers take notice. By 25, Julian had become one of the most respected close combat instructors in the special operations community. Fighters who trained under him didn't just learn technique. They learned control, patience, and precision. He was known among a very select circle by a nickname earned through underground exhibition matches held quietly among military circuits. The Phantom, a name given to him because opponents swore they could never quite touch him, no matter how hard they tried. He was there, And then he wasn't like smoke slipping through fingers. He never lost. Not once. Not in 23 sanctioned military exhibition matches. Not in a handful of underground circuits. He was occasionally invited to test himself against elite fighters from other countries' special forces. But it wasn't fame or glory that drove Julian. He fought because his younger brother, Ethan, idolized him. Ethan was 6 years younger, born with a heart condition that kept him from ever pursuing the military life Julian had chosen. But he loved combat sports with the same intensity Julian carried into every match. Ethan trained obsessively at local gyms, dreaming of one day fighting professionally despite his family's worry and his doctor's warnings. Julian tried to guide him carefully, teaching him discipline, technique, respect for the sport, always reminding him to listen to his body, to know his limits. Ethan didn't always listen, desperate to prove himself and frustrated by amateur promoters who dismissed him due to his medical history. Ethan began fighting in unregulated underground matches, circuits without proper medical oversight, without weight classes enforced fairly, without anyone checking fighters' health before letting them step into makeshift rings. Julian didn't find out until it was too late. He received a call while stationed overseas, informed that his brother had collapsed during an underground fight after taking a series of blows that triggered a cardiac event his weakened heart couldn't survive. By the time Julian managed emergency leave and flew home, Ethan was already gone. The guilt swallowed him whole. He replayed every training session in his mind, wondering what he could have done differently, what warning he should have emphasized more forcefully, what signs he had missed. He blamed the underground circuits for their recklessness. He blamed himself for not being present enough to stop it. He blamed the very sport that had once given both brothers purpose and connection. At Ethan's funeral, standing beside a casket far too small for the dreams it contained, Julian made a silent promise. He would never fight again. He would never let combat take anything else from him or from anyone he loved. The name Phantom, along with everything it represented, would be buried alongside his brother. He requested an honorable discharge shortly after, walking away from a career that had defined him, from a community that respected him, from a version of himself he no longer recognized. For the following years, Julian drifted. He worked quiet, anonymous jobs, warehouse labor, maintenance work, anything that required no attention, no recognition, no expectation. He avoided gyms entirely at first, the mere sight of combat sports too painful, a reminder of what he had lost. Eventually, he found himself drawn back toward that world, not to fight, but simply to be near it in the safest way he could manage, cleaning the floors of the gym in Las Vegas, watching from a careful distance, allowing himself only enough proximity to remember his brother, without drowning in the memory entirely. Apex Fight Academy became his sanctuary of contradiction, close enough to the sport that had shaped his life, far enough removed that he never had to step inside a cage again, until Cole Braddock forced his hand. Standing in that cage now, staring down at the humiliated champion picking himself off the canvas, Julian felt the walls he had built over the last decade crack open. Memories flooded back with painful clarity. Ethan's laugh during their backyard sparring sessions as children, the pride in Ethan's eyes the day Julian earned his instructor certification, the sound of the hospital machines the night everything ended. He hadn't fought to prove anything. He had fought because Braddock's mockery, his careless disrespect towards something Julian held sacred, had triggered something he could no longer suppress. Braddock rose to his feet, wiping sweat from his brow, staring at Julian with a mixture of anger and dawning respect. "That's it," he said, voice tight with controlled fury now instead of arrogance. "We're finishing this. Right now. No more holding back." The gym around them buzzed with anticipation, sensing they were witnessing something far bigger than a viral video stunt. Julian closed his eyes briefly, feeling Ethan's presence in the quiet space behind his eyelids, the way he always did in moments that mattered most. "Forgive me," he thought. "I promised I wouldn't do this again. But some things are worth breaking a promise for." When he opened his eyes, the janitor was gone. Only the Phantom remained. The champion demanded a real fight. He had no idea he was about to face a man who had once been trained to end confrontations before his opponent even realized the fight had begun. News of the confrontation spread to the gym like wildfire. Then beyond it, someone had uploaded a shaky 10-second clip of Braddock hitting the canvas. and within an hour it had thousands of views. By the time the gym's owner, a stern but fair man named Victor Hale, arrived to see what the commotion was about, half the internet already knew something unusual was happening at Apex Fight Academy. Victor pushed through the crowd, his expression hardening as he took in the scene, his prize champion standing in the cage, chest heaving, glaring at a gym employee like he was staring down a rival contender. "What in the hell is going on?" Victor demanded. "Your janitor just embarrassed me in front of my sponsors," Braddock snapped, gesturing wildly toward Julian. "I want a real match. Proper rules. Right now." Victor's eyes moved to Julian, who stood calmly at the edge of the cage, still holding the borrowed gloves loosely in one hand. Something about the older man's posture gave Victor pause, a stillness that didn't belong to someone who had simply gotten lucky against an elite athlete. "Is that true?" Victor asked, addressing Julian directly for what might have been the first time in the 2 years he'd worked there. Julian met his gaze evenly. "It was an accident that got out of hand." "Accident?" Braddock barked a laugh, though there was no real humor in it. "You moved like you knew exactly what I was going to throw before I threw it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered fighters. Marcus, still standing near ringside, spoke up cautiously. "He's right, Victor. I've never seen anyone move like that. Not even our top guys." Victor studied Julian for a long moment, arms crossed, calculating. He had built Apex Fight Academy from nothing into one of the premier fight camps on the West Coast, and part of that success came from recognizing raw talent before anyone else did. Something about the way Julian carried himself now, different from the quiet, invisible man who had swept these same floors for the past 2 years, told Victor he was looking at someone far more significant than a janitor who got a lucky night. "Fine," Victor said finally, "but if we're doing this, we're doing it properly. Full gear, licensed referee, medical staff on standby. I won't have anyone getting seriously hurt in my gym over pride." Braddock scoffed but didn't argue. His pride demanded a rematch, a real one, something that would erase the humiliation of the last few minutes rather than let it fester into legend. "Give me 1 week to prepare," Julian said quietly. 1 week? Braddock repeated incredulously. "I don't need a week to finish you." "It's not for you," Julian said, his tone calm but final. "It's for me?" Something in his voice silenced the room. Victor nodded slowly, sensing there was more to this than anyone yet understood. 1 week, he agreed. That evening, after the gym had emptied and the cameras had packed away their equipment, Julian remained behind. He walked to the small storage closet where he kept his cleaning supplies and, reaching to the very back behind stacked boxes of paper towels, pulled out an old, weathered duffel bag he hadn't touched in years. Inside were remnants of a life he had tried to forget. A set of worn hand wraps, a faded photograph of himself and Ethan standing together after his brother's first amateur fight, and a small metal dog tag engraved with a nickname he hadn't spoken aloud in a decade. He sat on the gym floor amid the quiet emptiness, running his thumb over the photograph, allowing himself, finally, to grieve properly instead of simply enduring silence as a substitute for healing. Over the following days, Julian trained alone before dawn, long before any other fighters arrived. He moved through forms and drills that had been dormant in his muscles for years, each motion at first stiff and hesitant, then gradually more fluid as old instincts reawakened. He wasn't preparing to fight Braddock out of anger or a desire for revenge. He was preparing to finally reconcile with the part of himself he had buried alongside his brother. Marcus, arriving early one morning to grab equipment, caught sight of Julian training through the gym's window before the building officially opened. He watched, transfixed, as the quiet janitor moved with a grace and discipline that belonged in professional highlight reels, not maintenance schedules. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched, understanding on some intuitive level that he was witnessing something private and sacred. A man rebuilding a bridge to a version of himself he thought he'd lost forever. Word of the upcoming exhibition match spread rapidly through both traditional media and social platforms. What had started as a spontaneous, humiliating stunt had transformed into one of the most anticipated unofficial matchups the fight community had seen in years. Undefeated champion versus mystery janitor. Sports commentators debated it on national television. Fitness influencers speculated wildly about Julian's background. Braddock, sensing the growing spotlight, leaned fully into the villain role, promising in interview after interview that he would ensure the incident from earlier that week became nothing more than a forgotten footnote. Julian avoided all interviews, all cameras, all attention. He continued his quiet routine of cleaning floors during the day and training alone before sunrise, allowing the noise of public speculation to swirl around him without ever touching the calm center he had rebuilt within himself. On the morning of the match, as the sun rose over the Las Vegas skyline and a crowd began forming outside Apex Fight Academy larger than the gym had ever seen, Julian stood alone in the empty cage, running his thumb one final time over Ethan's old dog tag before slipping it beneath the shirt, close to his heart. "This one's for you, little brother," he whispered. Then he walked out to face Cole Braddock, ready, for the first time in 10 years, to let the phantom rise again, not out of anger, but out of love, discipline, and the quiet strength of a man who had finally made peace with his past. 10 years of silence, 1 week of preparation. And now, in front of the entire fight world, the Phantom was about to remind everyone why his name once made champions hesitate. The gym had been transformed. Extra seating had been brought in, though it barely accommodated the crowd pressing against the walls and spilling into the parking lot outside, watching through windows and phone screens held up by those lucky enough to secure a spot inside. Professional cameras from at least 3 sports networks had set up alongside the original production crew, capturing every angle of what had become, against all odds, one of the most talked-about exhibition matches in recent memory. Cole Braddock entered first, his championship belt gleaming under the gym lights, his entrance music blaring through speakers hastily installed for the occasion. He soaked in the crowd's energy, throwing punches into the air, playing every bit the confident champion determined to erase last week's embarrassment. Then Julian entered. He wore no elaborate entrance, no music, no theatrics. He walked through the crowd in simple training shorts and a plain black rash guard, his expression calm, his eyes focused entirely on the cage ahead of him. But something had changed in his bearing since the impromptu confrontation days earlier. Gone was a hunched, invisible posture of the man who mopped floors unnoticed. In its place stood someone who moved with quiet, coiled purpose, every step measured, every breath controlled. Marcus, standing near the entrance to offer support, gave Julian a small nod as he passed. Julian returned it briefly before climbing into the cage. The referee, a respected veteran of the sport brought in specifically for this exhibition, given its sudden significance, called both fighters to the center for final instructions. Braddock stared Julian down, tried to reclaim some psychological advantage. Julian simply listened to the referee's words, his gaze steady, betraying no emotion whatsoever. "You got lucky last time," Braddock muttered under his breath, low enough that only Julian could hear. "Won't happen again." Julian said nothing. He simply returned to his corner and waited for the bell. When it rang, the crowd's roar was deafening. Braddock came out aggressive immediately, determined not to repeat his earlier mistake of underestimating his opponent. He moved with genuine technique now, using proper footwork, setting up combinations with a precision that had earned him his championship in the first place. This was not the careless showboating from days earlier. This was a legitimate elite athlete fighting for his reputation. Julian met the intensity with calm, measured defense. He slipped a crisp jab, redirected a leg kick with a well-timed check, and circled patiently, studying Braddock's rhythm the way a chess player studies an opponent's opening moves. He wasn't there to overwhelm. He was there to control. 2 minutes into the first round, Braddock landed a solid combination for the first time, catching Julian with a body shot that visibly staggered him. The crowd erupted, sensing the tide might be turning. Braddock pressed the advantage immediately, throwing a flurry meant to finish things decisively. But Julian, even staggered, remained composed. He absorbed what he needed to, deflected what he could, and created just enough distance to reset his footing. When Braddock overextended on his final strike of the combination, Julian saw the opening he had been patiently waiting for. He countered with precise, controlled combination of his own, not wild, not desperate, but calculated and economical, ended with a clean takedown that put Braddock flat on his back for the second time in a week. The crowd's roar shook the building. Braddock, embarrassment and fury blazing in his eyes, scrambled to defend himself on the ground, expecting a barrage of strikes. Instead, Julian transitioned smoothly into a dominant position, securing full control without throwing a single unnecessary blow. He wasn't trying to hurt Braddock. He was demonstrating, with complete clarity, the gap in skill and experience between them. Tap or don't, Julian said quietly, applying steady, increasing pressure to a tightly secured submission hold. But know this ends either way. Braddock, gritting his teeth against the pain, refused for several agonizing seconds, his pride warring against his body's screaming protests. The crowd held its breath collectively, cameras zooming in on the champion's straining face. Finally, with no other option remaining, Braddock tapped the canvas firmly, signaling his surrender. The referee rushed in immediately to call the match, raising Julian's hand as the gym exploded into thunderous, disbelieving applause. Braddock lay on the canvas for a long moment afterward, staring up at the ceiling, processing the reality of what had just happened. The undefeated champion, defeated decisively by a gym janitor the world hadn't known existed a week earlier. Julian didn't celebrate. He didn't pose for cameras or raise his arms triumphantly. He simply extended a hand toward Braddock, helping him rise from the canvas with the same quiet respect he had shown throughout the entire encounter. Braddock, humbled in a way few opponents had ever managed to humble him, accepted the hand. For a long moment, the two men stood facing each other, the roar of the crowd fading into something more personal between them. "Who taught you to fight like that?" Braddock asked quietly, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier arrogance. Julian's eyes softened slightly, the ghost of an old memory passing behind them. "My brother," he said simply. "Every lesson I ever learned, I learned trying to protect him." Braddock, sensing there was a deeper story behind those words, nodded slowly, understanding for the first time that he had been standing in the presence of something far more significant than a viral moment or an entertaining upset. As the cameras captured the historic image of the humbled champion and the mysterious janitor standing together in mutual respect, neither man could have known that this moment would go on to inspire not just a viral sensation, but a genuine transformation for them both. The world wanted a legend. Julian wanted something far more meaningful, a chance to finally turn his greatest loss into someone else's greatest gift. The footage of Julian's victory spread across the globe within hours. Sports networks replayed the finish endlessly. Analysts debated his technique on national broadcasts. Fitness magazines scrambled to uncover his background, eventually piecing together fragments of his military service, though Julian himself refused every interview request that flooded in. Reporters camped outside the gym for days, hoping for a statement. Sponsorship offers arrived by the dozens, some promising life-changing amount of money for Julian to step fully into a professional fighting career at an age when most competitors were already retired. Talk show hosts wanted him for interviews. Documentary filmmakers pitched entire projects built around the mystery janitor champion. Julian declined every single offer. Instead, 3 days after the match, he walked into Victor Hale's office and requested a private conversation. Victor, still processing the surreal turn his gym's reputation had taken, gestured for Julian to sit. "I'm not interested in fighting professionally," Julian said plainly. "That's not why I did this." "Then what do you want?" Victor asked, genuinely curious. Julian considered the question carefully before answering. "I want to teach. Properly. I want to make sure fighters here understand discipline before they understand aggression. I want them to respect the sport the way it deserves to be respected, not chase reckless glory the way." He paused, old grief flickering briefly across his face before he composed himself. "The way some people do, without understanding the real risks." Victor studied him for a long moment before extending his hand. "Head striking coach position is yours if you want it," he said. "Long overdue, apparently." Julian accepted, marking the beginning of an entirely new chapter, one built not on personal glory, but on purpose. Cole Braddock, humbled significantly by his defeat, returned to the gym the following week seeking out Julian directly. The champion, once arrogant and dismissive, approached with unexpected humility. "I want you to train me," Braddock said simply. "Properly, not just technique. Whatever it was that let you stay so calm, so controlled. I want to understand that too." Julian studied him carefully, remembering the mockery from just weeks earlier, weighing whether genuine change was possible in someone so recently consumed by ego. But he saw something honest in Braddock's request, a flicker of the same hunger for growth that had once defined Julian's own younger brother. "Discipline isn't something I teach quickly," Julian warned. "It's something you build every single day, whether anyone's watching or not." "I'm ready," Braddock said, and for the first time since Julian had met him, he actually believed it. Over the following months, Julian became more than a coach to Braddock. He became a mentor in the fullest sense, teaching him not just technical skill, but patience, humility, and the deeper responsibility that came with being an influential figure in a sport capable of both empowering and devastating young lives. Braddock's fighting style evolved dramatically, becoming more controlled, more strategic, more respectful of both his opponents and the sport itself. But more importantly, his character evolved alongside it. He began mentoring younger fighters at the gym himself, sharing lessons Julian had taught him, extending the same patience he had once lacked entirely. Marcus, who had quietly supported Julian from the very beginning, became one of his first official students, eventually developing into one of the gym's most promising rising talents, grounded by the same discipline-first philosophy Julian instilled in every session. But Julian's most meaningful project unfolded outside the gym's walls entirely. Using a portion of the sponsorship money he eventually accepted, carefully selected offers aligned with values he could stand behind, Julian established the Ethan Shaw Foundation, named in honor of his late brother. The foundation focused specifically on providing safe, medically supervised combat sports training for young people, particularly those from underserved communities who might otherwise be drawn toward unregulated, dangerous underground circuits, similar to one that had claimed Ethan's life. The foundation emphasized proper medical screening, certified coaching, and philosophy built entirely around discipline, respect, and safety over recklessness and empty glory. Julian personally oversaw much of the foundation's early programming, ensuring every lesson honored the values he wished someone had emphasized more forcefully to his brother all those years ago. On the first anniversary of the foundation's launch, standing before a group of young students gathered for their very first training session, Julian addressed them with words that had taken him a decade of grief and healing to fully understand himself. "Strength isn't about being undefeated," he told them, his voice steady, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had lived through both triumph and devastating loss. "It's not about titles or fame or proving anyone wrong. Real strength is discipline. It's patience. It's knowing your limits and respecting them. And most of all, it's having the courage to keep standing back up again and again, even after life knocks you down in ways you never thought you could survive." He paused, glancing briefly toward the sky, as though speaking directly to someone who could no longer hear him, yet whose memory guided every word regardless. "I lost someone very important to me because that lesson came too late," Julian continued. "I'm here to make sure it doesn't come too late for any of you." As the young students absorbed his words, nodding earnestly, eager to begin their own journeys under his careful guidance, Julian felt something settle within him that had been missing for nearly a decade. Not the absence of grief, which never fully disappeared, but a genuine sense of peace, purpose, and healing built from turning his greatest pain into something capable of protecting others.